Hello, everyone. We're live here. This is Dr. Politics and the Political Architect Show. My name is Ryan Gniadek. I'm here with Don Irvine, Dwight Patel, Jackie Sackstein, Mark Uncapher Esquire, and Marcus Alzona. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. It's been another week already.
Action-packed week.
Yes.
All right, so let's start this off with Montgomery County, where we live, where a lot of us work, etc.
Where we're prisoners.
Where we're prisoners. We are hitting phase one. We're finally seeing some slight crack in here on the opening. I mean, theaters are still closed. You can have outdoor dining. There's still curbside service and a bunch of other things. Mark Elrich, the county executive, I guess he got heckled when he made his announcement yesterday afternoon. I saw some debate about whether or not that was the right thing or the fair thing to do. Prince George's County is also doing the same thing, which is good, but we're finally making some progress, but we're a little bit behind many other counties. So where are we going? We've been doing, the club itself has been doing a Reopen Montgomery. Do you think we're being successful in that event, in that regard?
Well, I think our event was absolutely
our town hall
success.
was
Yes.
great.
We saw, hundreds and hundreds of people come out. We had a really good response rate on our poll.
And you know what? The next day, Mark Elrich announced that we were going to begin the reopening process for Montgomery County. And I think
don't think so.
the pressure of that, both the Governor Hogan, really, we can't take the credit for it. Governor Hogan put a lot of pressure on him at that press conference, but us combined with that Reopen Montgomery Facebook group surely didn't help matters. I mean, we had hundreds of people tune in live, not to mention people who watched after the event, and a lot of enthusiasm. And, frankly, there was people in the comments section of our event planning, when are we going to meet up in person, which started a conversation that led to people going to the event the next day. Not that we encouraged that or discouraged that. We didn't really give an opinion, but it was in the comments section of our event where that conversation kind of started to spring up, and then it carried over to the Facebook group. So I think it absolutely made a difference. And Mark Elrich made a fool of himself when he went out and, one, whoever authorized that to be outdoors is a fool. I mean, anyone could have predicted that would happen. Two, some people on this call might think that was intentional political play. If so, it backfired big time.
Yeah,
Two,
I think first
that.
of all,
Go ahead, Dwight.
It doesn't take much to have Mark Elrich look like a fool. I mean, the guy's like, the guy, has a tin ear. The guy,
Yeah.
I mean, he gets into arguments.
I know.
Anybody,
yelling back at the hecklers, you guys don't know how to listen to me, is not a good look. And next week, this is my weekend project, is we're going to make an attack ad on Mark Elrich. Talking about how we don't know how to listen to him. We're not obedient enough citizens to our government overlords and County Hall in Rockville. So that
I have to point out, I also read that after that one guy who was standing behind him said there's no phases in the Constitution, apparently Mark Elrich could be seen mouthing the word moron. Did not catch it at the time. But and even today I read that Elrich is claiming that most Montgomery County residents are saying that we're not ready to open up yet. And I have to say that it's got to be an outright lie.
I mean, he's an idiot. That's the end of the story.
There's a lot of business, like our friends at La Hinge. Yeah. They've been clamoring to open. They've got outdoor seating there. I frankly will be going and having lunch at La Hinge at some point next week.
Next week, I think we should have a Dr. Politics group lunch.
I think you're missing a little bit of the class issue, if you will, which is that in Montgomery County we have a disproportionate number of people who are zooming to work, so to speak, who work for government or work for contractors. Nothing wrong with contractors, right?
Yeah, we're good people.
Or Marcus, right? But are in a position to do, to continue on and get paid and all that other kind of stuff. And, this really isn't affecting them all that much. Yeah. And that's really one of the disconnects.
Well, Mark, you hit the nail right on the head with that one. And one of the heckles that was thrown at him is, if they took away your paycheck, you'd be reopening tomorrow. And he rolled his eyes at the person. Again, not a good look. I mean, imagine that attack ad. Mark Elrich rolls his eyes at the unemployed and hungry families in Montgomery County. I mean, that's just wonderful.
Easy parallel.
It's so disgusting, to be honest.
I almost
Hogan rolled his eyes.
For county executive again next year, so we can do some of these attacks. with Robin saying something, we clip to Mark Elrich rolling his eyes.
So is Elrich tone deaf on this issue?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, he's focusing on the people, the section of the government or the section of the population in Montgomery County that can keep getting a paycheck. The government workers, government contractors, who all those things are coming in, whereas the small businesses, the service areas, the working people that he claims to represent that he doesn't, they're disproportionately affected by the shutdown, by the economic shutdown that he's continuing, whereas our national government and state government said, well, you know what, you can start phasing things in. And he's blind to that.
I think he's going to see a detrimental effect on any chance he has of re-election.
I think what he's doing is right now. I think he knows he's going to have a primary with what's her name? Nancy Florine. She'll probably run.
No, she's old news. The real risk is David Blair, frankly. But I mean, or someone like him. But does David? I mean, if Mark Elrich is catering to the contractor class, is his tone deafness towards working people, is David Blair going to be able to appeal to that? Now, maybe. I mean, Donald Trump's a billionaire who's done a better job appealing to working people than any politician in the last few decades, frankly. At least the last 10 years. So that might be the case. But, I mean, it is really hypocritical. I forget who brought it up at first, but Mark Elrich's whole pitch is he's for the working man in Montgomery County, or working person. There's no gender, according to his ideology. And we should all live in these little tiny apartments, and there should be no big houses and no cars, and we should all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Well, he had no problem driving up in his brand new Yukon, as Dwight would say, to Catman Square and telling all those
Suburban. It's not a Yukon. It's a Suburban.
His brand new Suburban, and telling all those small businesses on Main Street that they don't get to reopen, even though other counties in the state are allowing them to do so. How is it not safe here, but it's safe there? It really just doesn't make sense. At a certain point, it becomes ridiculous and arbitrary. Why are we not doing the phase one the exact way it is described in Hogan's guidelines? Why are we saying we're doing phase one, but we're going to have these restrictions modified in these ways? I mean, how does that make any sense? It's just like, oh, Mark Elrich decided that he disagrees with Hogan's plan on this point. Is there a reason for that? Or does he just want to say that he's doing extra stuff to keep us safe so he can pander to a bunch of Karens at home who are moaning about how their kids aren't going to be safe and their parents aren't going to be safe and all this nonsense? It's utter.
For all the boomers, a Karen is what people on the internet describe as like a bit. Can I say that word? A grouchy white woman.
No, but that's what it is. It's pandering.
Jackie, you'll appreciate this. There was a question in one of the Star Trek. How a Karen saved.
Okay, we're gonna move on.
No Star Trek.
But back to my point.
I think there are a couple of words we should give Ryan instructions for. The moment you hear it, we mute Dwight. But can I make a quick observation? One of the things that I am very frustrated with. So this is why I'm on the show. I'm going to vent. It is the numbers that we see are really kind of misleading on COVID. And what we see is a cumulative number of how many people have the case without taking into account the fact that we know statistically that people tend to, on average, get over the disease within about 15 days. Now, if you're really sick, it can be longer than that. It can be a little less than that, but basically it's 15 days. So when you look at, for example, the Montgomery County numbers that just hit 50,000, you can go back basically 15 days to May 14th, right, when we were at 35,000, right? So what we really kind of have is we're looking, oh, gee, we've got 50,000, what have you, the hospitalizations are going down. But we have a growing number of people who have gotten over the disease. Now, they're not showing up on the numbers because the metric that's used for, quote, getting over the disease is you have to have 3 negative tests. And a lot of people who have it aren't being hospitalized. They don't need to be hospitalized, which is a great thing. But the challenge is that we're not reflecting the fact that the number of people with the disease is in fact declining.
Well, Mark, you're exactly right. And part of the problem, or part of the reason that is a problem, is because this got twisted. The narrative got twisted mostly by the media from this being a resource problem to being a disease problem. As you said, most people who have the disease don't get hospitalized and just end up having what's essentially a worse cold at home, or if they have any symptoms at all. And frankly, I don't really think that's a problem, right? If you have it at home and you stay home and you don't get other people sick, right. It's like, okay, I had a nasty cold. So what? It's the people who go to hospitals, who need to go to the hospital, and whether we have the resources to properly treat them that makes this the catastrophe that it is. But if those numbers are going down and more people are getting over it and most of the people are staying at home, it's not a problem. I mean, ABC, I was so happy when I saw this, and I was even amazed that ABC would even report this. They looked at 21 states that eased restrictions on May 4th or earlier, and they found no major increase across those states in hospitalizations, death, or the percentage of people testing positive.
And you saw what Facebook did.
I'm going to ask one more question before we move on from Elrich, though, if we can, which is just that if this was an election year, would Elrich act any differently?
I don't think
so. Not.
I think he genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing. And let me tell you, and this is what really grinds my gears, and I want to get this in before we move on. He added 2 more metrics. We were at 7 before, and now we're at 9.
I know. It's ridiculous.
Like he's moving the
metrics, some of the metrics don't even make sense. And that's one of the things Governor Hogan pointed out during his press conference. And I do want to pivot a little bit because as Dwight often gripes, we're not just a local show. We are a national show with a national appeal.
Yes, we do.
Allegedly.
People from Arizona are watching us right now. Hey, John.
Governor Cuomo, this was one of the most ridiculous things I saw, where he was like, salons can open at 50% and they can do hair, but they can't do nails. What's the reason for that? What is unsafe about nails or less socially distanced about doing nails at 50% capacity than is it hair? I'm sure Jackie is very frustrated.
Why must I suffer? Look at this.
And it's not just Elrich. It's every liberal on the pedestal that thinks that they can use this as an opportunity to exert more government control.
Okay,
I hate this has become a partisan issue.
This is all about the election in November. They want to inflict as much pain as possible.
Dwight, I really don't think that. I think you're missing. No, I think you're missing. You're missing the impulse that they have of, in a crisis like this, to assume the liberals, that government needs to step in because individuals can't be trusted.
Yes, and you know what? I'm going to take the very bold step. This is going to be breaking news in Ryan Miner tomorrow. In that, a few months ago, when this first started and Cuomo was getting praised, I bought into a little bit. And I said something nice about Governor Cuomo on the show. I would like to retract that statement and redirect my praise towards Governor Kemp and Governor DeSantis, whose states have responded miraculously towards this, done a great job. Georgia's had less of done much better than Maryland, 3 million more people. And they got torched and ridiculed in the media, and people on Twitter were saying that they've got blood on their hands and personally killed your grandmother. Meanwhile, Governor Cuomo's the one who sent COVID patients to nursing homes and didn't get a single article of ridicule. Not a single article. He got that, but he didn't get a CNN headline of ridicule for that on their shows. It's ridiculous.
And Ryan, it's kind of, you saw Facebook when Mark posted the comparison, they flagged that as fake news.
I know.
I mean, Facebook is,
it's a good pivot into a potential later topic, actually.
Yeah.
But,
all right. So we'll leave Mark Elrich of Montgomery County behind for now. So now I'm going to my self-serving topic, which is my taste of freedom in Utah this past week.
Yeah, rub it in.
Yeah. So I had to go to Utah, as you all know, because my father-in-law, 90 years old, passed away pretty fast, quite suddenly. And so I got to experience from start to finish what it's like to travel, as well as what it's like to experience a state that is really kind of going through that opening process. They never really totally shut down, but I think they heavily recommended that people follow guidelines and whatnot. So my first thing was face masks on a plane. Okay. Wasn't crazy about it, but maybe Mark can shed some light on this part of it, and I want to kind of give the overview, and then everybody can just jump in. I put a face mask in when I entered BWI, but it wasn't really clear whether or not I needed to do so. I didn't see a sign on the door. The workers were wearing them. Most of the passengers were wearing them, but when you get to the gate area, it was 50-50 at best. Everybody did put them on getting on the plane, but it was not enforced on the plane. I mean, the flight attendants were not going to come by and police you if you lowered it or took it off. And there weren't that many people on the plane anyway. I don't think we were getting to a kind of a militant situation in that respect. Other parts, funeral home, family gathered for a viewing, no face mask required. Outdoor graveside service, that's, you're outside. I think people were given that individual choice as to what to make it there. But, restaurants were open. This was great. I mean, I was able to take my kids out to dinner at a Mexican restaurant and be seated at a table and get served. And that was great. We didn't have to wear a face mask inside the restaurant. But I will say, that was the second restaurant I had visited that day. I'd visited some friends earlier, and they took us to lunch. The guy who I hadn't seen for about 4 years since he moved to Utah, he really, really wanted to eat in this restaurant. It's called Mo Betta's, and it's kind of Hawaiian type of food. And his wife and his son were like, I don't know if we want to do that. Maybe we'll just bring it home. And he kept resisting. We pull up to the front of the restaurant, and there's a young kid wearing a face mask in front of the door. And he's just, he's welcoming us. And then he has to give us like about the 5-minute instruction on what we have to do once we enter the restaurant. The little things on the floor here's where you stand, you'll see those markings, and there'll be a red line as you go through the line, and you'll stand behind that line and all these things. And it didn't take very long as we got in there and we were kind of figuring out what we wanted to eat that the wife and the son convinced the husband is like, they looked around, saw people cleaning the tables. So it's like, we'll just take it home, and go home with that. It just looked like it was going to be too much of a hassle. And then for stores, Home Depot and Costco had face mask policies. But as my brother-in-law from Arizona who wanted to go to Home Depot, and my other brother-in-law said, well, you need to wear a face mask. And my brother-in-law says, what about Lowe's? He said, no. He goes, I'm going to Lowe's. Because my brother-in-law from Arizona hates the whole mask thing. So there we go. But it was nice. I mean, you don't get, shamed for not wearing a mask. And you see a lot of people in the stores, that where the employees are wearing the mask, but the customers now have the option. And Utah, they want that freedom. So go.
Well, Utah actually likes freedom, unlike Maryland, where it's viewed as a sin.
It's a luxury. It's only for
I'm very much looking forward to going to Georgia in a few weeks, where restaurants were given their own choices. And to kind of give an update on Dwight's favorite metric here, which is the Sal's Pizza Index, they've decided after a few weeks of Georgia not really having any outbreak that, they are okay to have people in the restaurant again sitting down. So again, business owners making responsible decisions for their own businesses. What a concept.
By the way, Melbourne's open too for.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback. I just looked up the numbers, and in Utah they've got fewer cases in Montgomery County. I know you're much larger than just Montgomery County. Utah is, and they also do a good job of tracking the number of people who've recovered. I don't know if they're making assumptions there or they're doing testing. They're showing 4,900 people have recovered. So in fact, they've got about 3,000 cases right now. So it certainly is not, it's a far cry from where we are here in Maryland.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And here's the thing. People are not, it's like, I think CNN, MSNBC, they owe an apology to Governor Kemp and Governor DeSantis because they were, again, going back and look at this. People aren't dying. And something, at the end of the day, this is not the Black Plague. It's not.
Well, but listen, there was a reason. Let's go draw it back. In March, there was a reason for doing what we did, which was to hold so we wouldn't overwhelm. At that point, let's go back. We were doubling every 5 days. Had we continued the number of cases, had we continued to do that by this time, or actually earlier in May, we would have completely overwhelmed the healthcare facilities. That's not the case now.
Yes, I agree.
But, I don't think we should. I think I understand in the beginning, we did tamp this down, we did flatten the curve, but I think we should have been open around May 15th. We should have started opening.
Dwight, it's really easy to retrospective about hindsight's 2020, right? So we can go back and look and say, this is the date when we should have done this, and this is the date when we should have done that. It's really great to listen to liberal podcasters talk about how Trump's an idiot for not closing down the entire country in February, as if that would have had any support, right? So, some people just like to shout out opinions. I'm not saying you're doing that. But I do think Mark is exactly right and on point in that we all closed down states opened back up as it was responsible for them to do so. The problem now is that some states, really just certain blue states, are deciding to kind of hold back from opening up when they should do that.
Or counties.
And it's important to not restrict personal freedoms beyond the amount that you need to destroy.
We've got a whole lot of other stuff going on this week.
So much news happened this week.
Yes.
Right. So next, something that just popped up late this afternoon today was President Trump. We knew that he'd been threatening to withhold funding or for the World Health Organization. He's basically come out and said we're not going to do this anymore. We don't want to be a part of this anymore. So it's about apparently about $400 million a year by what I see roughly. And one of the articles I was reading said there was about $237 million of that is kind of like the assessment, the dues or whatever, and then the rest is voluntary. So it's not clear to some people, and maybe somebody here on this panel knows, as to whether or not the assessment is something that we're still committed to doing no matter what President Trump says, or can we just cut them off in total? And this is a good idea.
Well, that was the headline. One of the left headlines that I read today, basically, and that's the question I'll pose to the group here is President Trump says we're withdrawing support to the World Health Organization. Can he do that?
Yes, and I'm all for it.
I'm not sure what the legal authorities are on here, but as to whether it's a good idea, I think absolutely. I mean, the entire purpose for that organization is to prevent something from happening like what we're going through right now, and they completely and utterly failed at every single aspect of that. So it's a giant waste of money. Now, should something like that exist? Yes, but it shouldn't be controlled by the Chinese. Frankly, I'm skeptical whether they should even have a part of it after seeing the way that they've behaved themselves recently.
Honestly,
we should start a new World Health Organization chaired by the United States and Israel, and allow any other democratic nation to join that would like to. That's my proposal.
Taiwan.
Just say no to communists.
I like that, actually.
Yes.
And I say I really think
Gniadek for president.
Let China be represented by Taiwan.
And you know what?
I'm channeling Dwight for you.
I'm back to the policies of the Dulles brothers, of recognizing Taiwan.
I've been
having a one-China policy.
But I'm seeing a lot of parallel here.
Formosa.
I'm seeing a lot of parallel here to the Paris Accords. Is we're committing money to something that's quite honestly not doing anything. Why are we wasting our money?
Yeah, I mean, why are we? Honestly, I think we should just kick the UN out of America. Let them move their headquarters.
We are not pulling a Brexit, Dwight.
Dwight, where are we going to go to lobby for support for our new World Health Organization?
Yeah.
Also, honestly,
because
selfishly, if we do that, Israel has one less ally in the UN, and we have so few already.
Israel would leave with us. We don't. Basically, the United Nations is a group of anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-Western tin horn dictators.
True.
We had Libya and Sudan running, and now China running.
Let's move on to something more that happened this week.
I just want to ask one thing about this, though, before we move on, which is just that part of the argument too, though, is that it's what about the other vaccines or other things that the WHO deals with polio and other things. Is that still valid, Ryan, that we ought to just move to a new organization that handles all of that?
Yes, I think that they've utterly and completely failed. Frankly, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing more of the job of the World Health Organization than the World Health Organization is. They're useless. And I like the idea of adding Taiwan also, and we should recognize them as China and not Taiwan on the website.
Thank you.
For this organization.
The Republic of China. The Republic of China.
The Republic of China,
right.
Yes.
Republic of China. All right.
Well,
So
there's a bunch of guys in a room somewhere in Shanghai who are busily writing, and all of you, the rest of you, you're never going to get a visa to get in.
We're on a
Do you
list.
think that we're
already visited China.
Sorry to prevent us from
I'll
pivoting.
go to the real China.
What do we have to do to get our show banned by the Great Firewall?
All right, so maybe now we're going to attack what maybe the most explosive issue we'll have tonight, which is this whole
literally
George Floyd situation, right? So we have the man in Minneapolis.
Yeah. And let me tell you, the cop,
he died. Mm-hmm. This has sparked riots and protests nationwide about this. We see the resurgence now of Black Lives Matter. We're seeing really, anarchy going on here. I mean, what's going on here? What can we do? I think we agreed before the show. We're all in agreement that this is we abhor this, and we
Mm-hmm.
the police. He was the officer was charged with what, 3rd-degree murder today, I think it was.
Yes, and I've done my research on this guy. He's had 12 counts in the past of police brutality and police misconduct brought up against him before. So the fact that it yes. So
and who was the prosecutor? Who was the prosecutor? Who was the prosecutor that kind of let him off?
I think her name's Amy something.
Yeah, isn't she going to be Joe's VP? No, yes. But here's the thing. This is okay. Not to throw back to the good old days of when.
Not going to end well.
Be ready.
We're just going to go ahead and end well. Now I'm going to jump in with my point. And that, you know what? Good. I think that Dwight's back. I think that what the
back to Ryan. Come on, stop him. Let Ryan speak.
That officer, quite frankly, what type of language am I allowed to use on here? He's a dickhead cop.
He's a dick.
Bad cop, okay? Dirty cop. What he did is murder, and he was arrested and charged with 3rd-degree murder, which is exactly what's supposed to happen.
Exactly.
One injustice does not justify another injustice.
But wait a second. You just. I mean, I'm not going to justify it, but I think you also described something that the 12 prior cases. The reaction is not just to a specific incident.
Yes, absolutely.
It is a frustration about what. Again, I don't follow.
No, you know what, Mark? You're absolutely right, but I do think there are productive ways to respond to things and unproductive ways to respond to things. Burning an entire city is not going to repair all the problems that plague Black America. Now, calling Amy Klobuchar's office and asking why she declined to prosecute that guy would be a much more way for all of these people to have channeled their energy than going to pick up a new flat screen TV at Target. It's just, and you know what? Frankly, I shouldn't have said that because it mischaracterized the situation. There's a few bad actors who really spoil a bunch, and anyone who went out there and had the idea that it was going to be a peaceful protest quickly realized that they made a mistake because some bad actors went out and manipulated the situation for their own personal gains. And frankly, it's made worse by the whole COVID situation, not only because of the risk of disease or whatnot, but because everyone was masked. So you couldn't actually tell who Antifa was and who was peaceful because everyone was wearing a mask, which is, again, another problem. But
why is the Democratic mayor of that city allowing Black neighborhoods to be burned down and not intervening and stopping?
No, you're absolutely right.
Populist and letting people burn down the neighborhood. Like
people were
this
shot,
is like
people were
crazy
dying.
thing. Like they need to protect our citizens regardless of their skin color.
Well, it's like when the mayor of Baltimore, after Freddie Gray said, let the city burn, let people give them room to destroy. It's a terrible injustice that we're using one terrible, awful event that should never happen again and exposes issues with our systems to justify burning down Black-owned small businesses, burning down primarily Black inner cities. This does not solve anything. It just makes it 10 times worse, and it hurts the argument of the people trying to make actual change. And it's really disgusting. Anyone who is out there burning a building is a criminal. It's disgusting. It's wrong. You should not be doing that. And it's not just happening in Minneapolis. We're seeing this ripple out. There was a call to a Brooklyn police station today saying that we're going to kill all the cops in Brooklyn. You know, they're all on high alert. Now there's already cops set up in Baltimore tonight preparing for protesters.
And, this is all a residual effect of the Obama-Biden regime when they gave aid and comfort to people that were doing not peaceable protesting, but doing violence.
Dwight, we're getting close to the mute button territory.
We're getting close to mute button. We're getting close to mute button, but on a similar strand, I did see an article today that there are a series of celebrities actually posting bail for all of these people in Minneapolis who are burning down buildings that were arrested. Among that list, I know, is Steve Carell and Seth Rogen. I didn't read past the headline. That's
Seth Rogen and Steve Carell live in a nice gated community.
I'm sure Seth Rogen would feel very differently about it if someone was throwing a rock through his BMW. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you know what? They want to talk about privilege. They're not the ones having their businesses burned down or their houses burned down. I mean, that's awfully privileged of them to come in with their millions they've made in Hollywood and pay to bail the people who are destroying livelihoods of working people. It's disgusting, just like Marcus said.
I'm going to channel a liberal for a second. They need to check their privilege.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Rodney. It's like, if you remember when Rodney King happened, you had all the Hollywood, the rioting was South Central LA. It was not in Beverly Hills. It was not happening in Pasadena. Sure, you can be on your moral high horse, while someone else's neighborhood is being burned to the ground. And that's what's happening here. I mean, honestly, it is a tragedy. One, the mayor isn't doing anything. The governor is not doing anything. I mean, really, it seems like the president's going to have to step in to fix the problem, just the way Governor Hogan had to step into Baltimore to fix the problem.
And he already has stepped in, and he has an investigation going.
Yep.
Yeah, but look, you're talking about Hollywood or these personalities, these celebrities. I put down on the list, what Colin Kaepernick, had tweeted out. When civility leads to death, revolting is the only answer. How does this help? At all? This adds fuel to the fire on this. This is a time when we should be unifying and saying, yeah, look, we know this is a travesty, this is an injustice, and yet we have these people out there that are doing exactly the opposite, and it doesn't help the situation at all. And then Obama comes in and talks about, I hope this is not the state of, normal race relations in 2020.
He is the one that's responsible for a lot of this stuff.
No, come on, Dwight. I disagree with you on that.
Okay, and we talked about it before the show too, also in relation to this, so Al Velshi, the reporting out of Minneapolis on MSNBC, he's out there and he's talking about, the riots and what's going on there, and he has the audacity, to say that it's generally speaking, it's not unruly, but fires have been started while he's standing, hundreds of feet away from a burning building.
Yeah, that was certainly irony if I've ever seen it. Now I will want to give him huge
information minister. Something.
I want to give him huge props though. Last night was the first time I ever watched MSNBC on purpose, and
was Rachel Maddow on because she makes me vomit?
No, she wasn't. But that reporter, yes, he was kind of putting a spin on it of, it's mostly peaceful while the buildings were all burning and a gas pipe was burst and all this stuff, and there was a risk of an explosion, and they were burning the police precinct. But he handled it like a pro in terms of his temperament of the situation. I quite literally, and during the 5 minutes I was watching, so who knows how many other times something similar happened, one of the protesters / rioters, but again, you can't tell because everyone's wearing a mask, put their hands on his shoulder to try to get his attention. That could have ended very poorly. And he handled it. He just kept moving on like he was, walking in the same direction he was, kept talking to the camera like nothing was happening, which really is the only way you can respond. But most people don't have that temperament. That is like kind of remind you of why investigative journalism like that is an honorable profession. Now, I wish they wouldn't be so biased, but huge props to him. This might be the only time I ever give MSNBC kudos on the show, so we should remember this.
Move on before it sinks in.
Probably far between anything else. Yeah. So President Trump, we've talked about this a little bit too beforehand, and we don't know how far we're going to go with this with Ryan and Marcus, but we'll see. I'm going to take that shot here.
I'll set a timer. They get 7 minutes.
On President Trump signing executive order about on social media, Twitter, etc., and what they're going to do now, they kind of seem to be precipitated by the fact that President Trump had tweeted out a couple of things about mail-in voting and fraudulent and all this kind of stuff, and so Twitter basically marked that as misinformation or disinformation. Said go here for the source. Now the sources they cited are Washington Post, CNN, which. Great.
Could I pile on the Washington Post a little bit? We didn't, not to talk about COVID, but it strikes me as fascinating that the Washington Post, who's benefiting from crushing small businesses?
Amazon.
Who owns the Washington Post?
Some guy named Jeff something or another,
or something like that.
And I think this tees up a broader issue that, you raised a really important issue about the role of opinions and what have you, but across party lines, left and right, I think one of the big conversations we're going to have in the next decade is the role of big tech, the role of Facebook, the role of Twitter, the role of Amazon, and it re-examines some of the legal protections that they have been operating under.
Here's the thing, Mark. My view is this. Okay, I'm a free enterprise guy. Like it or not, I hate it when Twitter does what they do. But here's something else. Twitter is a private company. It is not a public utility. And if this were, I don't think, we should be telling Facebook, do this, Twitter, do this. Yeah, they're, everybody uses it. But something, as I told the people who back in the 90s when they all wanted to sue Microsoft and force them to put Netscape in their Windows version. And I said, look, build a better mousetrap. People come to you. Microsoft doesn't have to do anything. All this was welfare for Netscape and Compact and all the other manufacturers.
So I now let me say how I agree with you in part. Let me also just put out there some additional information about it, in that what we're talking about here, like underneath that, there's the generic, oh yes, private company, and that's the general policy that I think that most of us here subscribe to. What we're talking about is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which distinguishes, which gives, like, the government is now exempting these companies from the existing legal law, or the existing law and liabilities for things happening on their platform if they're acting as a platform versus a publisher. So before, you're a publisher, like you have a website, you have a newspaper, you can publish things, you select what you can publish, you can filter what you publish, and within certain guidelines, you're liable for what you publish. If you publish something that's completely wrong or whatever, again, I'm not a lawyer practicing in Maryland or anything like that, but you're liable. You have certain liabilities, not everything, but certain ones. And what the Communications Decency Act was saying that, okay, well, you're a platform now, and because you're a platform, you can't be sued. Yeah. Basically, Marcus, it turns them into utilities. With the idea, that's what it's saying. It's like your platform,
absolutely full
utility.
You've described
so you don't get to, don't have to be, you can't be sued. And if there's something wrong goes on there, the public doesn't have recourse to actually use the existing laws to remedy it, because they can say, oh, I'm a platform, except
and full disclosure, in the 90s, I still represent tech companies, but I was a lobbyist on behalf of the tech industry, including Netscape. And Microsoft, and Microsoft too. Didn't take a position on the antitrust issue, on the antitrust case, but specifically for that provision in the Communications Act. I think it certainly made sense in the 90s, but I acknowledge that there are broader than just this Twitter question, really significant issues that we're going to wrestle with as a society, and I think it cuts across both liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrats, as to whether or not those policies really need to be reexamined.
I guess my question is, what I don't really understand is how would these companies continue to operate without those protections? It's absolutely necessary, and I'm not sure if you guys are disputing that part or not, but without those protections, you can't operate a social media company, because you'd have to essentially moderate all the content. It would lead to more fact checking, not less. It would lead to more moderation, not less, because now all of a sudden you're giving them liability for everything on their service.
You're giving them liability if they're acting like a publisher. If they're going and actually selecting content that they prefer and don't prefer, then they're a publisher. Does AT&T, when you subscribe, or Verizon, do they look at your packets and say,
no, that's true. Okay.
Actually, so you're, Marcus, that's a really bad example, because AT&T now owns CNN.
So basically, what you're
but your point is right.
Cell phone
so basically, what you're saying is that they should continue to get the protections of a platform, but they shouldn't be able to moderate content.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That is only one of a variety of issues that I think where big tech is going to have.
I agree with you guys 100%.
That is the protection. If you're a platform, you can't. You're not supposed to be moderating for content, except for, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but the rationale, as I understand it, was in the CDA was to go against indecent thing. It was basically a porn filter. And actually, some of the people from my grad school, I believe, also were involved in some of the data for that. I've come to know from a friend of mine who was also at the grad school that, yeah, our classmate was actually working on some of the studies on that. So that was the intent of it. It wasn't to regulate speech insofar as it was sort of like allowing for lewd image filter.
Yeah, no, and actually it specifically you nailed it with it's the computer decency provision, and it was aimed at pornography and liability for that.
But I think
but obviously the legal principle has ended up morphing and is much broader than that.
I
now.
agree.
And I believe that the
100%
concerns
on that point, and that if social media companies are going to get additional protections under law, they should be neutral. I guess then the question is, where do you draw the gray area? Because I think most people would say that them having a terms of service that, for example, you cannot post violent images, that's an acceptable level of moderation. But where do you draw the line?
What if it's news? People could argue that the picture of George Floyd was a violent image.
And actually, that's a great example because if someone posted that, I know Instagram specifically was putting a filter over it saying you must click to view because it's a graphic image. Now
I saw that on Facebook today, but not
in a way that's a form of moderation. So you have to decide, where do you draw the line? I think that things like that end up protecting the consumer, and most people agree with it in specific cases like that where it's very clear cut, but there's a lot of gray area, which is where the problems really start to arise. So it's really a complicated issue. In principle, I agree with you guys 100%. They should have to be 100% neutral, viewpoint neutral, if they're going to get platform protections. But it gets really tricky when you start to meddle into the gray areas.
Well, yeah, but that was some of the criticisms of, from a technology standpoint, I understand the need to have some sort of moderation, and what you might have wanted to do back in the 1990s on this new technology. If I recall correctly, the criticism for people who are against the CDA was because it would lead to censorship. And again, just like in the last few months, and we're dealing with COVID, but even when we're talking about the CDA over the last 20 years, I think you can argue now very clearly that it has led to political censorship. It has grown beyond it, and now everything is considered, well, that violates computer standards because that's a triggering thing for me, and I can't bear to see that, and we need to, therefore restrict, ban, deplatform people.
I don't disagree, but where do you draw the line exactly? That's the problem.
If you look
opinion pieces,
let Mark go ahead. He's our lawyer.
I was going to say, if you look very carefully at the way they express when they do censorship, it is always they being, I'm thinking of Google and Facebook, whatever, is very much they are trying to put it into this community standards. We're talking about violence, we're talking about whatever, and they've tried to constrain themselves to that. However, I think it's arguable that they've kind of stretched that exception that allows them to do some editing beyond the breaking point.
Yeah, it's been made very clear in the past couple of years, and I think it's going to continue to be seen, that a lot of these platforms and the leaders of these platforms are showing their political bias. I know a couple years ago, there was a Google employee, I think, who was fired for being openly Republican or something like that.
Yeah, Firefox. Remember that happened at Firefox too? Somebody that donated to,
and that's the fear is are they going to take it too far? And anything that is right-leaning that is considered an opinion is going to be deemed misinformation and taken down. We had it happen on our page.
Yep. I guess
I was having a conversation with our friend Al Mendelson, and we were just talking about hate that I delivered, and he made a comment about Fat Albert, and that got flagged as cyberbullying, and everyone knows Fat Albert's a cartoon character.
Wow.
Yeah. So I agree with you guys 100% in principle. I guess I'm just a little bit more skeptical of how, if you're going to add additional regulation to ensure that reasonable moderation doesn't encroach into political bias, which it has 100%. I agree. And that's unacceptable, and it's an abuse of their, I guess, privileges that were granted to them as a platform. Where do you draw that line? Because, one alternative is just to say there shouldn't be any moderation at all, and that's really the only way to do it clear cut. But I think a lot of people wouldn't want that. Unless that's what you're advocating for.
So that you're not adding legislation, you're actually removing the gift they were giving. That you can estimate the the protection from legal liability and the there was a panel at CPAC that I attended that actually talked about this, and the people for both for and against doing this, but they were talking about the liability section basically is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, so in the CDA, we sort of gave the fledgling tech companies hundreds of millions of dollars in liability protection. Yep. Why are we doing that now? I mean, we shouldn't be doing that. It's not about necessarily adding new things. It's saying, well, you know what? You're acting as a publisher. You're not and they even, when they talk in their documents about it, they talk about themselves as a platform, and then they talk about publishing. They talk about how they're a publisher and how they do things, and how if you want to publish your thing this way,
Marcus, it's kind of like, when you give protections for industries. I know for back in the 80s, you notice the Japanese weren't allowed to compete on the luxury car market. And when Harley Davidson got protection from foreign imports and then after a while, those were removed. Harley Davidson came back. They were on the market. They're back. And one of our friends is running Harley Davidson's media campaigns in the entire state of Florida. But Harley Davidson came back. Now we have 4 Japanese luxury cars, which initially there was that protectionism put in place to protect Detroit back when they were just coming off the oil crisis of the 1970s, and then in the 80s, we saw Acura, Lexus, Infiniti, which is probably going to be going away, by the way, Infiniti. But I think it's about time we take away protection for the social media platforms. It's like, you don't need it anymore. You've grown up. You don't need to be protected. It's kind of like when we protected oil companies in the early days of the oil industry, back when water was more expensive than oil.
Let me ask you this, and we'll move on right after this, but did Trump correctly refer to that section of the CDA, in terms of dealing with this? And as a result of this kind of battle, or whatever you want to call it, do you think Congress will or should rewrite it, update that, or something like that? I mean, a lot of things have happened since the CDA was written.
Well, it was 24 years ago, 96. To be honest with you, I did not read the executive order closely enough, although I'm kind of not more than a little bit skeptical that this is a policy that can be appropriately addressed in an executive order, because a new president, it can change it, and we can have a whole set of things. So in general, I think it's something that ought to be addressed. It's part of a kind of a broader look at the legal status of big tech.
But something else has to be pointed out about what Mark said is 24 years ago. That predates me and Ryan. Tech is changing so rapidly, and the rules of engagement are changing so rapidly that I almost feel like citing something that predates these platforms almost isn't going to work.
I mean, look how technology has just changed the last 12 months.
I agree on that front, and I think updating the law to reflect the realities.
So note, it's not that they're citing it. If you're saying it's not going to work, the executive order is citing what they're claiming when they do an action and they're taken to court by somebody. They do an action, say against you, Jackie, or against Ryan, and you're like, well, why did you do this? And you say, well, this is completely wrong, and you have all the facts behind you. You go to court, and then they walk in and say, well, Section 230, you don't get to decide. We can be an arbiter of that. Sorry. And then the judge looks at it and says, oh, yeah, I guess so. You claim to be a platform, so we're just going to trust you that you're a platform.
My point here is that moving forward, there's going to have to be more, up-to-date legislation specifically revolving around these types of social media platforms.
But we haven't talked about sort of the
devil's advocate a little bit. Here's the thing: how is this different? I mean, the Washington Post probably gets a bunch of op-eds that are friendly on our side of the view, but they don't run 95% of them.
Right.
How is that different than?
They are a publisher. And we're saying that if Twitter or Facebook or whichever platform wants to filter through and decide what to publish and what to not publish, in other words, deplatform, they're allowed to do that as a publisher with all the rights and responsibilities legally therein. So allow them to be a publisher. They want to choose to be a publisher.
Well, that's what
Go
they
ahead.
they called themselves.
You want to be a platform,
too.
then you're just like, you're buying cell phone service, you're buying cable service, and you've purchased that. You don't get to change what that person uses it for.
So what Marcus is saying is, in effect, you can't be sitting on both stools. You got to pick which stool you're sitting on.
And they have to be 6 feet apart.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Which stool is better for them?
Interesting question.
That depends on your definition of better. Are they trying to be, hey, we want everyone to have a place here so we get more users and therefore more money, or do we want to be able to control the narrative?
So that more money. So actually, there is one of the other issues, which is the whole set of privacy, the amount of data collection. I think each of the 6 of us at one point have been kind of hopefully astounded at the ability of Facebook and
I know that Google knows every single thing about
how directly they can identify information and target and what have you. Now that's the trade-off that we do, because which of us has ever written it? Well, we've actually 6 of us have written checks to Facebook, but that's another story. But to have a normal personal account on Facebook and not take advantage of that personalization, it's all free. And the reason that it's free is because we give them so much data that for advertisers, it doesn't make economic sense anymore to buy a newspaper ad.
And not to
get not the consumer, we are the product.
Yes, absolutely. And not to get too deep into this, but I think part of the reason people are so astounded by this is that they don't really understand the economics of how the internet works. They think that, this is just a free service and it's like as some sort of charity. Google is not running a charity for you when they serve your search results. What it is it's all about the data. So you are paying them with something of value. That can be money, currency, or it can be data, which frankly is more valuable. And it's just the business model of how the internet works. Would we be better off if you had to have a subscription to use these services? Maybe. Who knows? But I mean, that's just not the way it is. And there's different efforts to try to shift towards that. I know someone mentioned the Mozilla Foundation earlier. One thing they were trying to do as a pilot is get a bunch of different internet sites to opt in, where if they subscribe to some subscription service that was a few dollars a month, all of these sites wouldn't serve ads for you. So in a way, it's like it's not ad block, but it's paid. We're not going to serve you ads because you're a paying subscriber, and it's like a bundle type system. As a kind of a study into if the internet could work effectively that way, and if they would make more or less money, and if the consumers would have a different opinion on how it works.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, and I want to blow someone's mind because I only learned this like last month. I've never noticed this before, and I bet a bunch of people haven't. If you scroll through Facebook, every 4th post is an ad. And a lot of people don't realize that because they're so targeted towards you. And I don't know if maybe it's just me as a millennial or whatever I'm called. I think I'm called a cusper because of the year I was born. It doesn't bother me because I'd rather have ads that show me new things that I might potentially like. I found a great Etsy fudge seller. I have eaten 4 containers of fudge since being in quarantine. It's delicious. She's got 5 stars. It's great.
That's an ad, and I hope they're paying for it.
Right, exactly. I'd rather get ads that show me something I might actually want rather than, I don't know, Viagra commercials or whatever the hell. That doesn't apply to me at all.
Yep.
So it doesn't really bother me.
And the client or the ad buyer will pay more money for it also.
A lot of those ads are very useful. I've bought various things, and I found a Red Squad lapel pin.
The fact that Dwight's getting ads for lapel pins shows that Facebook really knows who he is.
Very targeted.
But I find it sometimes it's both exhilarating and disturbing when I send email about something and then I'm looking at YouTube and all of a sudden there's like a YouTube ad for that product.
Why aren't you using an ad blocker?
No, I mean, but I'm saying it's both great but also disturbing at the same time. Right. But and that's how it is.
Yeah. Let me say this too. I mean, one interesting thing I saw while we were talking about this privacy thing. This is that I was actually surprised by the number of billboards I saw in Utah. Utah has lots of billboards on I-15 for DuckDuckGo.
Yep, and they're really going for they're doing something slightly different in the subscription model I mentioned earlier. They're trying to prove that you can make money as a search company without targeted advertising. And I don't know. I use DuckDuckGo on my desktop actually. I tried it out just to see how it was. I mean, the search results are fine compared to Google, but I mean, it's interesting to see if they'll have long-term success. They certainly have a niche following. I think we're getting to final thoughts territory, but I do want.
We're getting close. Let's just talk about Joe Biden and go to final thoughts. I just want to bring up this one last thing here. So Joe Biden, in his infinite wisdom, has decided that he wants to run, and challenge Donald Trump on the economy. This is going to be a winning issue for Joe Biden to beat Donald Trump in November. How does this work?
The polls are already out there where people ask who do they think is better equipped to bounce the economy back after COVID, and it's overwhelmingly gone to Trump.
Yeah. And part of the argument is that even though the economy is not great right now because of COVID, and all this stuff, that by November we're expecting, it may actually be a record quarter, because of the depths of where we're going from the depths up there, and that doesn't really help Biden. So I think even Democratic strategists are saying, like, probably not a great idea.
It's a non-starter.
Yeah, I mean, Biden has run probably the worst campaign of any presumptive nominee I've ever seen, and I've heard about lots of bad campaigns. I haven't really been alive for that many of them, quite frankly. I'm only 19 years old.
Just ask Dwight; he knows them all.
Yeah, Dwight knows them all. And you know what? I do want to say I think that
I tell you, Mark, the Kefauver race, Estes Kefauver, that was
you told him no coonskin cap, and he would not listen.
You know what? I think that, and I want to issue a challenge in the name of transparency, and I really think the American people deserve to hear from both candidates and make an informed decision about who they vote for. Because we're not able to have rallies and in-person events for much of this campaign season, I think we should up the number of presidential debates from 3 to 5.
And Ryan, I want to extend an invitation to Joe Biden and
Donald Trump.
We will host a debate. Dr. Politics will host a debate between the president.
Now, so speaking of things that will never happen,
I think we should save that for Direct Line. What do you think?
Yes. Speaking of things that will never happen, I do want to just throw in that Spotify just signed a deal valued at over $100 million with Joe Rogan, the largest podcast. He runs the largest podcast on the internet, for an exclusive distribution deal. If Spotify wants to reach out to us for $100 million,
Spotify wants to give us $100 million.
I was talking to Dwight.
Ryan, we do it for half of that.
Spotify does video podcasts now. We might start distributing.
My wife would appreciate that, because AIM just cut my hours in half and my salary. So now I'm making the kind of money I made 35 years ago.
Oh wow!
My wife feels poor.
Oh. Well, all right. 7:57. Final thoughts, Marcus.
I'd say it's a 50-50 chance. RNC Charlotte, RNC Miami.
Hey. I heard Tampa.
Tampa would just be rinse, wash, and repeat.
Republican governor, Republican mayor. Tampa, and also Tampa's in recent memory. Republican mayor of Miami.
If I get a vote, Vegas. They're opening the casinos next week. Mama's got the itch.
Hey, when is Maryland Live opening, by the way? You know?
I don't know.
Never.
I have heard not yet. Mark.
Well, I'm going to put in a plug for Atlanta, because they've got good convention facilities.
You know how bad the traffic would be there, though?
Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to be in a bus. But I'm amazed. I'm sorry not to digress, but that Dwight has not weighed in with about when the convention it was in Miami Beach.
Oh yeah, that was a great convention. That was the convention.
Jackie, next.
Come on, what you got?
My turn. Okay, I was just going to say one of the things that we didn't talk about was just stimulus spending. There's proposals out there for like what is it, $450 a week or whatever to kind of a get back to work incentive and some other things. I think we've kind of run the gamut with the stimulus spending.
Yep.
We've added enough to the national debt. We don't need to do this. It may take a while to make a total recovery, but we are recovering. We're moving forward. We can put an end to this spending now.
Yes, agreed. Ryan.
Okay, speaking of big tech, I want to give a shout out to Amazon, specifically their public policy team, which a week ago an hour before the show, so I wasn't able to cover this last week, responded to a moronic tweet from Joe Biden, or more likely one of his aides, because unlike Trump, he probably doesn't even know what Twitter is, saying something about how Amazon needs to pay their fair share of taxes. And they responded, at Joe Biden, we pay every cent owed. You spent 3 decades in the Senate and know that Congress wrote these tax laws to encourage companies to invest in the U.S. economy. We have 500,000 jobs with a minimum wage of $15 an hour across 40 states. Assume your complaint is with tax code, not Amazon. And you know what? I just want to say that every single one of our many viewers should go out and get an Amazon Prime subscription and consider it a donation to the Donald J. Trump for President campaign.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to tack onto that. Amazon also did say that most of the employees they hired to cover the COVID surge are going to get to keep their jobs.
Yes. I mean, it's a donation. I mean, even Amazon and the Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, and all these people are realizing, I mean, and Joe Biden's the supposed moderate Democrat, but it just shows you how far left the party has drifted. I mean, that's just a moronic statement. It's the tax code that really is the incentivizes them to grow by doing that. If you have a problem with the tax code, they rightly point out he's been in government for 3 decades and hasn't done anything. I mean, in fact, I don't know this for sure. I mean, don't take anything I say seriously, viewers, but I'm sure he voted for the tax laws that allowed for these sorts of situations to begin with. So it's really just, I mean, the whole thing is kind of stupid. Joe Biden probably doesn't remember what he voted for, so I don't blame him, but his aides should have known better. But don't...
All right, I gotta cut you off.
Amazon Prime.
All right, shameless plug. Dwight.
Yes, one really important, go vote on Tuesday if you haven't. You can go to the Board of Election, drop off. Our friend Neil Parrott needs some help with the sine wave on Monday. And my shout out is going to be email Neil at neilparrott.org if you can help him out Monday with sine wave.
Yep.
And Neil's a good friend to the show. He's a friend to our county club. He's a good friend of ours. Yep. He's an engineer. He's a smart guy, and he'll probably be the next.
I think we have an agreement on the show that we need more engineers in Congress.
Yes, we do.
All right, I'm going to wrap up with my final thought. Speaking of things that President Trump has signed today, he also signed the Never Again Holocaust Education Act into law, which I think is fantastic. I think there's way too many people that are misdirecting the word Nazi and calling Trump, he's trying to start the next Holocaust. And on top of that, just a huge rise in anti-Semitism, which is really sad to see. So I think this is going to be a really important and a really good thing that's going to be introduced into our schools. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the beginning of summer, and we will see you next week.
Yep.